John and Whitney, can you both hear me?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, John. How are you?
Who's this?
This is Simone.
Oh, hi, Simone. How are you?
I'm great. And then Whitney, I heard you as well.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, great. Can I ask you guys real fast which one of my screens you're seeing? Are you seeing my presentation or my behind the scenes presentation with my notes?
I'm seeing your
Presentation.
presentation.
Presentation. Excellent. Okay. Thank you. All right. So we have 12 attendees coming up right now. I think we'll sit tight for maybe another 2 or 3 minutes and see who else we get. And I also want to make sure that we get Shelley Covert on the line as well.
And Simone, when you get started, I'll probably go on mute.
Oh, I'll mute all of you. Don't worry.
Okay. All right, cool.
But thank you, John.
Good.
I appreciate
Yep.
it. All right. Thank you to everybody who has gone ahead and hopped on with us. We're going to wait about another minute, and I just want to ensure that we get all of our folks on. All right, so it's 10:02. We're going to go ahead and get our webinar started. Just FYI for everybody, including our panelists, I am muting everyone just to kind of minimize our background noise, especially since we're recording the webinar for our attendees that can't join us live today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Just want to say welcome to everyone. Welcome. This is Sierra Climate Adaptation Mitigation and Mitigation Partnerships webinar titled Case Studies in Sierra Climate Action, Stories from the Field. My name is Simone Cordery-Cotter, and I'm the new program manager for Sierra Climate Adaptation and Mitigation Partnership. I would really like to thank the former program manager, Nikki Caravelli, for her hard work leading up to this presentation and acknowledge her work on this prior to leaving SBC. So just a few housekeeping items. If at any point you can't hear me or there are some audio issues, we have a chat function or a Q&A function. Either of those you're welcome to use just to give me a quick heads up that we're having some issues, and any sort of notice of that would be much appreciated. This is one of the first webinars that I'm running for Sierra Camp, so I would ask that if I have any technical challenges that everybody bear with me. I would appreciate that. Thank you very much. This will also be recorded, as I've said before, for later reference and sent out to everyone who has registered. And I've muted everyone, so there will be an opportunity for discussion later in the webinar when we do our Q&A panel. And of course, the first thing I try to do, I'll get an error. All right, so just a quick agenda, a quick overview of how this is all going to go. I'm going to give a brief introduction and overview of Sierra Camp's role in Sierra Nevada climate action. Then we'll head into our headliners. We have Whitney Brennan talking about the California Tahoe Conservancy's adaptation efforts, which is a massive undertaking on a regional scale. Then John will educate us on the town level, what adaptation looks like for small mountain towns like Mammoth Lakes. And then we're very fortunate to have Shelley Covert from the Nisenan tribe, who will round us out with community lens on climate action and adaptation. After all of our speakers have given their presentations, we'll be facilitating a question and answer session with all three of our presenters, although we may lose John, in which case I'll do my best to answer questions about Mammoth Lake, seeing as Sierra Business Council was able to work on the project. But I'm happy to take note of any questions that I cannot answer and send them to John after the fact. So Sierra Camp is a program of Sierra Business Council, which is a triple bottom line organization that advocates for the social, economic, and environmental improvement of the Sierra Nevada region of California. Some of our programs include the Small Business Development Center, which offers free consulting and free counseling for small businesses, and that can run anywhere from financing to marketing to succession planning. We also run the Sierra Nevada Energy Watch. We recruit and certify green businesses for the California Green Business Network. We're the implementers and stewards of the Sierra Nevada Geotourism Initiative, and we also engage in state and federal advocacy through our government affairs team. So a lot going on under the very large tent that is Sierra Business Council. Sierra Camp, which is a program of Sierra Business Council, is a cross-sector partnership working to promote climate adaptation and mitigation strategies across the Sierra Nevada region. So Sierra Camp serves as a climate action capacity building hub for Sierra and Cascade communities and fosters urban-rural connections to build statewide investment in the region. The overall goal is to reduce the burden of climate impacts on communities and ecosystems throughout the Sierra Cascade region, as well as in the downstream urban communities that depend on the region's natural resources. So the reason we're all gathered here today is because of this very neat report that came out just over a year ago. California's fourth climate change assessment included regional reports, including one for the entirety of the Sierra Nevada. The report identified major climate impacts and vulnerabilities specific to the Sierra Nevada, and the major takeaways were that the region is facing major snowpack loss over the next 50 to 100 years, mounting challenges on the water management front, increasing frequency and intensity of wildfire events, all of which are currently having and will have more of an impact on human communities in the region. We were fortunate to have the opportunity to host a day-long workshop on the summary report last winter, which featured the report's lead author, Michael Dettinger from USGS, and I like to think that that brought a number of the region's key vulnerabilities to the forefront of the conversation. In light of this, Sierra Nevada communities are most definitely paying attention and taking action, and have been for some time. To date, almost 30 greenhouse gas inventories have been conducted up and down the Sierra, and to our knowledge, 5 of those communities are undertaking or have undertaken some kind of climate-specific vulnerability assessment. Just from our peer adaptation group that we hosted earlier this year, more than 20 community meetings have been held specifically around climate change and vulnerability, and several more have been held around the specific subjects of wildfire, energy independence, and sustainability more broadly. Sierra Camp is 40 members strong this year, and by conservative estimates, we've seen upwards of $30 million invested in the region around climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resiliency just this year. In our efforts as the regional collaborative and the leaders in climate adaptation mitigation for the region, and in our ongoing goal to continue to serve our communities equitably, Sierra Camp adopted a climate justice policy this year with the guidance of our leadership team. You can see the entire statement and background on our website, which is sbcsierracamp.com. This was important to us because as we continue to see the most vulnerable communities in the state affected by climate change events like wildfire, flooding, and drought, we wanted their needs at the forefront of our work. So these are folks that have often been the least culpable in pollution and emissions, but will be the most vulnerable to future negative environmental impacts like wildfire, degradation of drinking water, food security, job security, etc. So we have a responsibility as leaders within our organizations and leaders in climate action to consider how we can elevate the voices of structurally disempowered people, invite and empower them in our projects, programs, leadership, communications, and planning, and ultimately work together towards a shared vision where everyone has equitable access to opportunity and the resources they need, not just to survive, but to thrive, to be resilient, and even transform in the face of climate challenges. As an organization, we're encouraging our member groups to adopt some kind of climate justice policy and commitment, and we'll be hearing more from them on how we can advance this in action at our upcoming member meetings throughout the Sierra. For those of you who are members, please stay tuned. For those of you who are not members, feel free to visit our website and send me any additional insights or feedback. As I mentioned already, we have some upcoming member summits. These are Sierra Camp members that will be taking place from December to February. We already have dates, times, and venues for our Eastern and Northern Sierra meetings. If you are a current member and you need more information, please feel free to reach out to me. And if you are not a current member but would like to be, please let me know. Membership is free and open to any government, business, or non-government organization up and down the Sierra Nevada, from Modoc County down to Kern County. So I'll give a quick overview of who we've got speaking in the order of operations in which they'll be speaking. We're lucky to have Whitney Brennan with us today with California Tahoe Conservancy, John Wentworth with Town of Mammoth Lakes, and Shelley Covert with the Nevada City Rancheria and Nisenan Tribe. And with that, Whitney, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. And Whitney, let me know if you would like me to run your slides for you, or if you'd like to take control. What works best for you?
I think it'd be easier if I can have control.
Absolutely. Hang on, I'll hand control over to you. All right, Whitney, you have remote control now. Let me know.
All right.
That.
Just make sure it works.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Great.
All right, I'm going to mute myself.
Okay. So thank you, Simone, for setting this up. My name, as you heard, is Whitney Brennan. I work for the California Tahoe Conservancy. In case you don't know, that's a small California state agency, and we have jurisdiction over some land that we own on the California side of the Tahoe Basin. I'm here today to talk to you about the Lake Tahoe Climate Adaptation Action Plan. What I want to emphasize is it is not our plan, although we are helping to collaboratively lead it, and we found funding for it and hired the consultants. We are hoping it's something that can be used by everybody in the basin, and so we are trying to think of it as kind of going beyond just being the Conservancy's plan and being the, hopefully, becoming the basin's plan. So, as many of you know, in California, there are a lot of California state mandates and guidance encouraging us to consider climate change in our planning efforts. This was definitely some of the basis for us starting to think about a climate adaptation action plan for the basin. I think originally we thought it would maybe focus on California state agencies and their actions because we all have these similar state mandates. Kind of through our stakeholder process, we've gotten so much interest from a wide variety of stakeholders, a lot of Nevada state agencies, a lot of local and regional agencies, and so it's kind of shifted in a great way into becoming kind of a wider set of actions and a wider set of interests than just California state agencies. So that's been great. And our main interest in doing this plan was, first of all, to kind of be able to inform local and regional planning efforts. And we wanted to do that by providing this common set of scientific findings and assumptions so that everyone can use these in their regional plans whenever they're doing their updates. We didn't want to replace anyone's plans. We wanted to just be able to give them the information to do their own updates. We want to be able to improve how we plan for and adapt to climate change. Some of that is just kind of not thinking agency by agency, but kind of getting together and thinking as a basin, what are we doing? We wanted to provide the basis for future technical guidance because we're seeing a lot of kind of missing steps in between the science that we hear about climate and how managers can actually use this information. So we're trying to see kind of what gaps are out there, what information needs there are for managers. And we wanted to be able to provide an action plan for legislators and funders to be able to tell the story of what's happening in the basin with climate change, what are we already doing, and what do we need. And as you can see from this diagram, we're hoping that this plan is going to benefit a lot of people. What we've always been thinking is that we definitely took information from Tahoe plans, regional plans, and we want to be able to feed back into that. So we're hoping the information that we gathered in this plan can help all these regional agencies with their plan updates. Also, we're hoping it can help all of these Sierra Nevada partnerships, give them some guidance on climate change impacts. And obviously, it's definitely going to impact how we do things internally at our agency. So this plan has three main parts. So the first one, as I mentioned, we wanted to have some basin-specific climate projections. The Sierra Nevada regional report was great. It did talk about things at the Sierra Nevada level, so we wanted to see if we could get to some information at the Lake Tahoe level. What we also did is a science synthesis. There's been a lot of climate research done in the last 10 years, and we wanted to be able to kind of bring all that information together in one place. And we use that information to do an integrated vulnerability assessment. So what we're doing here is just trying to look at all these resources that people in the basin value and think about what their risks there are from climate change. And we wanted to look at a wide variety of areas. So all kinds of natural resources, from the lake to meadows to rivers to forests, all kinds of things in the built environment and community, recreation, infrastructure, public health. We were trying to look at a wide range of things since they're all pretty much interconnected. And then the ultimate goal of this is to get some adaptation actions out of this that will be something that agencies are willing to take on over the next few years. And we had a great team. We had a wide variety of science, engineering, and economic researchers involved in this, a lot of them which have worked in the basin for a lot of years and are considered experts on their topical areas. We also were able to work with a wide variety of stakeholders, and this has been great. I don't think we were sure in the beginning how many people would be interested in participating, but we've had some great participation. We've had 2 stakeholder meetings this year, and we've had a lot of people come from California state agencies, Nevada state agencies, regional agencies, the Washoe tribe, some nonprofits. So it's been really great. I think that's really important because when we're trying to put together the action plan, a lot of agencies are already doing things, and it's just that everyone's doing it agency by agency, and so maybe everyone doesn't know what everyone else is doing. So having everyone get together and talk about what they're doing, acknowledge, you know, what's missing, what's already being done, has been great. Also, it's important because as a California state agency, we don't have jurisdiction over much of the basin, and so we can't tell people what to do. We can only talk about kind of what we know, what we've learned, and maybe what actions aren't happening, and encourage people to do them. But everyone has to take on their kind of what they're willing to take on based on their agency's mission and jurisdiction. So it's been great having this level of participation. So I want to talk to you about some of our key findings. So you can see what we've been learning. A lot of these are similar to the trends we're seeing in that Sierra Nevada regional report. We just got some specific numbers for the Tahoe Basin. So as you've heard in other reports, the temperature is going to increase. This is looking at kind of the worst case scenario for Tahoe, with it increasing to temperatures comparable to Napa today by mid-century, and then temperatures comparable to Carson City and San Jose by the end of the century. And obviously, having increasing temperatures has effects on snowpack. So this is, once again, looking at worst case scenario. Obviously, today we have snow most of the time at our lake level. This is showing kind of the extreme scenario where by the end of the century, if we do have this dramatic temperature increase, then we could have situations where most of the time when precipitation falls in the basin, rain is more likely than snow. And as you can see here, that's most of the basin. This increased temperature and its effects on snowpack is also going to affect things like stream flow, which is very important in how our ecosystem functions. So right now, we obviously, you can see from the top chart, we have our highest runoff is in June. Usually that's because you have your snow melt in the spring, and that fills all of your rivers, and that's when you have your high flow. Now we're looking at worst case scenario in by the end of the century, we could have something where the peak runoff is in January. To me, that's saying that most of our precipitation is falling as rain rather than snow and flowing right away. That has huge impacts to a lot of things, including things like fish and how they spawn and what they're looking for. And one of the other things we're expecting to see is the high precipitation variability. So these, years of extreme storms and years of extended drought. So because of this precipitation variability and increased temperature, we're expecting also increased drought stress. So what you see here is all of these colors show an increase in drought stress on soils and plants. Obviously, some parts of the basin will have it worse than others. But what we're seeing is just that there's more likely to be less moisture in soils for plants, which could affect tree mortality, disease for trees, and ultimately could increase our chance of wildfires. Okay. And that's kind of what we're seeing here, is that we're predicting increased wildfire threat in the basin. The red in this picture was the Angora fire, a fire that we had historically, one of the few major wildfires we've had in the basin. And then we're looking at these orange and yellow layers being a projection of how much acreage we expect to burn at mid-century and end of century over a decade. So just showing that we're expected to have more acreage of wildfires overall in the basin in the future. So what does this mean for the resources that we value? What we did when we were looking at our vulnerability assessment was we broke things into 3 major systems based on kind of things that people value in Lake Tahoe. One of them being Lake Tahoe system, one being the upland forest system, and one being the built environment and communities. So what we found for the Lake Tahoe system is, obviously, along with increasing air temperature, we're expecting increased lake warming. That's going to affect how the lake mixes, and that definitely has strong effects on a lot of things, including lake clarity, water clarity, which is one of the things we value highly in Lake Tahoe. Also, we're expecting, because of these kind of extreme storms, that will have these high flow runoff events, and there'll be a lot more sediment transported into our rivers and lakes. And all of these factors are going to affect native biodiversity. For the upland system, because we're having these major storms, less precipitation in shorter time periods instead of over extended time, we're expecting there'll be an impact to groundwater storage. So when you have these big storms, more water is probably going to run off into lakes and streams instead of infiltrating into the ground. And this impact to groundwater tables can increase the amount of conifers that are in wetlands and meadows, and so we're losing some of that key wetland and meadow habitat. We're also expecting shifts in abundance and distribution of native species. And as we said earlier, increased tree mortality and higher risk of wildfires. For the built system and communities, we think all things such as roads, bike paths, other key infrastructure, water, energy, and infrastructure is going to be threatened by this increased risk of wildfire, flooding, erosion, and landslides. And that has impacts due to increased cost of maintenance, more traffic disruption, and also this risk of having issues with evacuation during emergencies. Recreation use is obviously going to be impacted by a low snowpack and other extreme weather events. Public health would be threatened by smoke if we have more wildfires, and also if we have extreme heat events. And traffic in the basin may be accelerated as tourists come here to seek cooler temperatures in Tahoe. But despite all these, it's not all doom and gloom. What I found through this process is agencies are already doing a lot to combat climate change impacts, and they want to do more. I feel like this is kind of a diagram of the process we've gone through. You can see we're pretty far along in the process. We're in the red box right now, and I think we've made great progress in what we're working on. And I think figuring out what actions everyone's taking on is giving kind of hope to the situation and showing people that we are working on this. As you can see here, we already worked on our draft vulnerability assessment, kind of looking at risk to resources that we value. We did a gaps analysis, which was just looking at kind of what plans, programs, projects are already out there in the basin. Are there any gaps where certain key climate impacts aren't being addressed? And right now, we're working on our draft action plan. So we're asking all stakeholders to submit actions that they're willing to take on over the next 2 to 3 years. And then we're going to get together in December to talk about these actions and come up with our final action plan. At this point, I think we're kind of thinking this is phase one. We started this process. It's been great. We've gotten so much more interest than we thought we would. And so it may end up, leading into another phase where we kind of go dive deeper into some of those actions. But I think it's been a really good process. One thing I wanted to share was just some insights I had. Let's see if it gets to work. Okay. And a lot of that dealt with kind of working in Tahoe, which is multi-jurisdictional, multiple stakeholders. It's 2 states, many counties, many cities, lots of different research institutes and nonprofits work here. And so although it has been great to work in this collaborative effort, it definitely has been time consuming. What we've found is there's been a huge investment in staff time for these collaborative efforts. Obviously, as I said, we don't have jurisdiction over other people's lands. Unlike some other people that do climate plans and can kind of have a say over what happens in their jurisdiction, we were trying to go beyond our jurisdiction and reach out to everyone and find out what everyone's doing so we could get a better idea of the basin's effort as a whole. But that definitely did mean we had to spend a lot of time doing regular communication between agencies, finding out people's values early in the process, being very clear on what our goals and outcomes are, and spending a lot of time on these stakeholder meetings and collaborative efforts. It's definitely been worth it, but it was definitely time consuming and a kind of strange situation for us to be kind of leading this effort, even though it's not just, hopefully not just our plan. Sorry, the arrow keeps disappearing on my computer. So thank you guys, and I'll wait for questions later.
Thank you, Whitney. Appreciate it. I think the arrow is disappearing because I was occasionally taking back control, but I appreciate it. All right. If anybody has any burning questions, please feel free to park them in that Q&A section. That's probably the best place to put them for now, or hold them until the end. And seeing as we're on time, and I'd like to keep us on time, John, we'll go straight over to you. Same question for you that I had for Whitney. Would you prefer control, or would you like me to run your slides for you? And I actually think I need to unmute you, so give me just a moment.
Go quicker that way.
There we go. You want to run your own?
Yes, please.
Okay, hang on just a moment. Okay, John, you should have control now.
Okay.
And then your control arrows are in the lower left corner of the screen.
I'm not seeing the control arrow. Oh, there they are. Okay, I got it.
Mhm.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to share with you a presentation that was made to the Mammoth Lakes Town Council when we adopted several general plan updates per the state mandates that Whitney was just talking about. I'm going to skip over some of these slides because a lot of them are kind of dry and are sort of boilerplate type language. But I'm going to focus on the very important need for individuality and on-the-ground specificity that goes into these works to do your general plan updates around housing and safety elements. So this is a quick background. Again, imagine you're a town council member. This is the presentation that you're getting. A fundamental piece of how we in Mammoth Lakes got to where we were had to do with the grant from SB1. There are grants available through that for local communities and jurisdictions to help fund a lot of this general plan update work. So I'd really encourage you to, if you're in that kind of position, to do some research with SB1, with Caltrans, your local state transportation folks. And that was very helpful. Without that grant from SB1, we could not have proceeded doing this because this is very expensive work and we didn't have the resources to do it. I'm going to see how this presentation presents itself. And it looks like it's working. So we did a housing element and a safety element at the same time, which I believe is how it's mandated by the state. And these are some of the specific type granular things specific to Mammoth Lakes. I'll give you a couple examples of that in a second. Things like the Community Housing Action Plan. And on this other side, something called CPAW, which is Community Prevention Against Wildfire. It's a program run by Headwaters Economics. I'll talk about that in a second. But these are the vulnerability assessment is very specific and granular to us. The Mono County Hazardous Mitigation Plan is obviously very important, and work we did with CAL FIRE. So real quick, the Community Planning Assistance for Wildfire, I would really encourage any town folks or counties who are on this call to look into this. Mammoth Lakes, you can see this little red dot. We were the first jurisdiction in the state of California to get one of these grants to do this. And what happens is a team of experts, fire experts, fuels experts, but more importantly, civil and municipal planning experts show up at no cost to your community and do a full top to bottom assessment of threats to your community from wildfire, but also provide a very detailed analysis about your zoning, your planning documents, and all the rest of it, so you can become incredibly resilient to wildfire going forward. So I really encourage you to look at that program. And as you can see, 3 or 4 other jurisdictions in California have now gotten these grants and they're moving forward with it, and you could be next. So I really encourage you to look into that. I'm going to kind of skip over this a little bit. These are the overall goals the consultant had to make this plan happen and move forward. Here's the background, the legislative framework. These are the state bills that require that these general plan update things happen. And this, now we're getting into the specifics of every community that you have to speak to about what are the impacts that are going to affect your community. And we had some very interesting discussions in Mammoth about that. You'll notice smoke and ash is on the list. That was not one of the things that was the consultants had even thought of before they showed up. But we drove right down into populations, elderly populations, buildings, infrastructure. What are our critical economic assets? We're a recreation-based tourism economy. That factored into a lot of these decisions. And we identify these major vulnerabilities as the things that are specific to kind of Mammoth Lake. So the idea, seniors living alone are vulnerable. Single access roads and those who live on them are highly susceptible to flooding and other things. Drought, wildfire, severe weather, and we had to make sure that we included smoke and ash. That was something that the consultants hadn't really thought about, but that's a key threat to us as we move forward. The nature of our forests, and also the fact that because we're such an isolated community, that vital goods can be exposed to all kinds of hazards that can cut us off from the town and make it impossible for people to continue to live and function up here. And in the safety element, these are all the things that we worked on to get approved by the town council. Again, this is some more kind of boilerplatey kind of language, but you will deal with these things as you look to adopt your own plans as well. But things we really focus on, creating equitable and affordable snow removal options. Snow removal in our town, and certainly probably some of your communities, is a very big deal, but we have to start thinking about that from a lens of equity. and what we can do with our residents who live on single access roads to maintain their emergency supplies. And also look at future development, real estate development applications for their potential impacts on risk reduction. If we have a big new hotel or some kind of project like that happening, what role are they going to play in all this? Then we get over to the housing element. And again, this is a mandate from the state, and we are looking to comply with that. And so we had some specific things that we had done here in the community that factor into this work with the housing element. The first thing was we had developed in our town, specific to our needs, a community housing action plan that was developed in November of 2017. It's very helpful to have a locally based plan like this, because this will inform your housing elements and all the kinds of goals and priorities you want to do, so that you're conforming with the state, but you're conforming with the state with things that are specific to the needs of your community. These are the high-level goals of the things we're trying to do. And you can see in a second how these got integrated into our housing element. And these are specific actions that the council approved to make this housing element happen. Again, I'm going to skip over some of these things that aren't they're all interesting and they're all important, but I wanted to point out with you some things that are examples of really granular efforts. So the town has purchased 25 acres in the middle of town called the parcel. And so this is a specific action that will now be in our general plan to seek funding to continue the planning process and process the entitlements for that housing opportunity. And another action is to work closely with the local ski area, Mammoth Resorts, on a pilot program to develop policy for employers to help with seasonal workforce and that kind of stuff. Again, specific granular kinds of things. Skipping over that one, probably going to, this is an important one, this is in our community housing action plan, is to find a way to develop a local source of funding that we can use as matches for grant opportunities with the state and with others. We've gotten some preliminary numbers back from building out that parcel in the middle of town. We could be looking at a gap of $40 to $60 million. We're going to have to find a way to fill that. We're a small town of 8,000 people. We're going to need an independent, locally generated revenue source to make that happen. So that's now exploring that as part of our housing element. And things like mobile homes and a long-term housing rental inspection program. We have a lot of landlords that live out of the area and do not maintain their properties at a level that's appropriate for people living in places like this, and want to make sure that the town can ding them a little bit to make sure that their places are going to be habitable, which is, believe it or not, a consistent kind of a problem. And we've also, this one, established a landlord-tenant matching program to increase opportunities for seasonal employees. That's a program is being implemented right now with the Chamber of Commerce, using a little technology and some local mountain smarts for figuring out a way to get second homeowners that have unoccupied buildings to be utilized for our workforce, which is a great way to take some pressure off of our local housing market. Accessory dwelling units, I'm sure you've all heard a lot about these. Again, there's legislation and things like this coming out of the state. We hope that will be an important part of our solution, of our toolkit for solutions for housing. And we've also tried to do what we can to address the challenges coming out of short-term rentals. This is a very complex, serious challenge for small communities like ours and yours. And we're doing a lot of work to try to figure out how we can really get our handle around this. We've done good so far. We're enforcing with Lakes, I think, California, which is kind of crazy to think about, of a town of 8,000 people. So it's a very serious program for us. And again, that's built into our housing element. And I'm trying to get the slide to advance. Maybe Simone, you can help me. It won't click forward. Hello, is anybody out there?
There we go. John, which slide are you trying to get to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, let me go back. It hung up there a second ago. Yeah, almost done here. So this is, talked about short-term rentals. RENA, this is standard state stuff that you're all going to have to deal with. And then this is just the language in front of the council to adopt the resolutions and the findings, which the council did. So now I thank you all very much. And if I have to leave, I have to leave in about 15 minutes or so, but you can certainly find me offline or through Simone to answer any questions you might have on the work we've done down here in Mammoth Lakes on a local jurisdictional level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. I am astonished at the speed at which you were able to move through all of those slides.
You aren't the first.
Well, thank you very much. All right, so continuing to kind of move through our program, I believe we've got Shelley Covert up next. So Shelley, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. John, forgive me, I'm going to mute you.
Thank you.
And Shelley, just checking that we've got you on the line. And I'm not able to hear you at the moment. All right, please hold for a technical challenge as we make sure that we've got Shelley on the line. And of course, I can't type. Thanks everybody for bearing with us while we figure this out. All right. So if everybody could just hang on for a moment, it looks like we're gonna have Shelley call back in just so we can establish a connection. But while we have a moment and we still have John on the line, we may as well use the opportunity. John, I have a quick question for you that came up while I was listening to your presentation that I was curious to know. What advantages did the town gain from combining your SB 379 planning and housing element update all at the same time? Because that seems like a pretty daunting undertaking.
It's an excellent question. I think when you're dealing with a small town with a limited budget, we have to find a way to do things as efficiently as possible. And as I mentioned, without the SB1 grant, I don't think we would have had any way of trying to do this at all. It's expensive, there's SQL work involved, and it's inhibiting. And I think it was the staff's determination that the best way, most efficient way to do this was to combine all these things into one effort with one set of consultants, and the grant and the work that Monroe County was doing with their hazard mitigation plan. And so the stars kind of lined up, and that's why we decided to move forward the way we did.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. Okay. So just FYI for everybody, as we're getting Shelley on the line here, I've unmuted everyone. Shelley, would you mind piping up? We'll see if we can get you back in. And Shelley, if we've got you, I cannot hear you. Huh, that is very strange. Okay. Hang on. I'm going to try a couple more technological workarounds. Thanks everybody again for sticking with us throughout this. I appreciate it. Shelley's very generously offering to type her presentation, which I think would be not as much fun because Shelley's an excellent storyteller. All right. All right, guys, we're going to try one more thing. All right. So sorry, guys, this is really important to me. I really want to make sure we have Shelley's voice on the phone. But while we're kind of figuring that out, I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Chris Mertens, who is generously offered to kind of field some questions for us. So Chris, I've gone ahead and unmuted you. Would you mind piping up? Nope, unfortunately. Oh dear. All kinds of technological challenges today. All right. So while we're getting this figured out, I do have a question. And I think, Whitney, if we still have you on the line, and John, since we're lucky enough to still have you. Quick question. It sounds as if both Mammoth and Tahoe are recognizing that warmer temperatures regionally will drive more visitorship and planning moves to accommodate that increased traffic. In fact, the nature of the coming changes in and especially around the Sierra are likely to drive increases in year-round residency. So this is going to impose its own set of challenges, different from short-term visitors, things like increased demands on schools, utilities, services, supplies, and so on. How is this distinction being accommodated?
So Simone, before I head off, it's an excellent question. And I think that a very helpful frame to look at these challenges through is the fact that at least Mammoth Lakes is an island. And I say that it's an island because in the county where we live, 95% of the land is federal public land. So we're going to have to be looking at those types of challenges and increasing year-round residential population, which frankly for us is something that we look forward to because we tend to be very seasonal at this point. But we're going to have to be looking through that lens of island communities and use that framework as a way to anticipate and deal with and negotiate the challenges that are going to be coming our way. I want to say we haven't really seen that yet. We do see sort of surges of visitation in the summertime when the weather is really hot, say down in Southern California or in Nevada or places like that where our visitation base comes from. But it's going to be a very important and very interesting set of challenges going forward. And it's great to be to have that pointed out.
Thank you, John. Whitney, if we've still got you on the line, did you have anything to add?
I mean, I think we have, some of the same situation as Mammoth, not as isolated, but some of the same issues. It's harder for me to speak for the whole basin since we aren't in charge of all the actions in the basin. I know a lot of people are thinking about this in the basin, thinking about visitorship and thinking about transportation and all of these issues that are brought up here. All I can say is that for the Conservancy itself, we are definitely looking into how it's going to impact, our kind of land ownership, as in we own a lot of recreational, land that's used for recreation, and how we're going to change things based on how we think, if people are going to be coming year-round instead of just in these peak seasons. So we're definitely looking into it for our agency. I can't really speak for every other agency in the basin, but I know it's on everybody's minds.
Awesome. Thank you, Whitney. Shelly, I think we unmuted you successfully. Would you mind saying hello? Maybe not. Oh, I'm so hopeful. Shelly, one more time, if you wouldn't mind, please. Oh, and it looks like we just lost your phone number. Oh, man. Okay. Plenty of technological issues today. Thanks, everybody, for bearing with us. I really appreciate it. Okay. So while I think Shelly's going to try to call back in one more time. John, while we still have you as well, I had a quick question about the CPAW process. How did Mammoth Lakes hear about that? And were there any special considerations when you engaged? Oh, we may have lost John. He may have had to hop off as well. Oh, boy. All right. All right. Shelly, could we have you vocalize one more time for me, please?
Yes, hello, I'm here. Can you hear me this time?
Woo! Success!
Oh.
All right.
Oh my goodness.
All right. Whew. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out with us while we did all of that. I really appreciate it. I don't think that this wonderful woman needs any introduction. Shelly, are you fine with me running your slides for you?
Sure, that's fine.
Excellent. All right. Okay. Thank you for everyone who bore with us while we did all of that. Much appreciated. And we still have plenty of time for questions and answers toward the end of this presentation. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce everybody to Shelly Covert of the Nisenan Rancheria tribe. And Shelly, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. I'll mute myself. And when you need another slide, please just say next slide.
All right, sounds great. Hamakani, everyone. Homoyabemi, Nishinanimimi wakamni, Lidam Lily, Yapemni, Daspa Hedidi. So I'm Shelly Covert. I'm the spokesperson for the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan tribe. And I'm also the executive director of our nonprofit CHIRP, which is the California Heritage Indigenous Research Project, which is the 501c3 charitable nonprofit that we started to support the tribe in all of its efforts. So CHIRP's mission is actually to preserve, protect, and perpetuate Nisenan culture. I did want to say that I'm taking a chance calling in from home today. So I have a dog that I'm actually letting outside right now, and it's probably going to bark, so please forgive me for all the background noise here today. So if it's interesting when I participate in conversations like this. A lot of times I find myself at a table in similar conversations where I wonder, like, what am I doing here? Like, you know, I can't talk about economic development or tourism really. I don't know much about you know, the different markets that drive economy and these different kind of things. But what I have found is, while I feel like I'm such a layperson, is that I guess the voice that I can bring is sort of a bridge. It's a bridge to, you know, we've got elders and tribal members who remember how things used to be. You know, we are oral community where for, you know, thousands of years we didn't read and write. So everything was passed on from generation to generation, by person to person, literally from mouth to ear, mouth to ear. And that voice that is so forgotten is the voice of what this landscape used to look like. And it's the, I suppose it's the voice of memory of the species that are gone and missing from our palette of life today. It's the remembrance of what the different streams tasted like. My grandpa actually talked about different streams tasted the best because, you know, and I would assume maybe there's a plant or mineral or something, you know, again, I'm not a scientist where I can go back and figure out why these things were. But it may be that there are little glimpses of what it used to be and why we are all so important when we're sitting around the table talking about the health and the quality of the environment. And it's, you know, a lot of times as I'm talking out loud, I'm connecting my own dots in my head. And as I was hearing the two presentations before me, you know, we're literally all sitting as witness where the, how can I say it, like the ball of twine is completely unraveling before us. And how can we grasp those ends to not only experience good quality of life and be part of the spectrum of life on this planet, but leave something for our children, something that we can be proud of and not be ashamed that we, you know, stood back and let these things unfold without having some say in what's going on. And again, you know, I do feel, you know, I'm not a scientist, but, you know, the native people across the planet have been saying for decades, you know, that we're heading over the cliff, we're heading for the edge of the waterfall. And that this, you know, we've got to stop, we've got to take record, we've got to take account of what's going on and stop. But how can we envision what that can look like if we can't remember the past? And how do we move forward with all of our technology and our re-engineering of everything, you know, roads and houses and our water systems and everything that we do today as people in a technological society? But where's the wisdom of the past? You know, how do we bring that forward with us somehow? And so that's my big question to everybody. I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir here today. But, you know, I guess we could go to the next slide. Simone, thank you. This next slide for us is really, really true. So it says, it's nice to see the locals educating themselves on Nisenan history. And the man says, yes, why? I can remember when they were called Datsuns, you know, and that's because we get called Nissan a lot with the cars and the rebranding of that whole situation. And then on the newspaper in front that the lady's holding, it says, local tribe seeks recognition. And, you know, our history here as Nisenan people has been completely erased. And because we are a gold rush loving community, a lot of people believe that, you know, all life and all history started at the time of the gold rush when people, you know, quote unquote, discovered this place. So a lot of my work is reintroducing the Nisenan people and this long, beautiful, rich I mean, rich in wealth, this economy where the people literally in a geographic space, everything was provided for life in that geography. We were very centralized in our leadership. We had head people, head of families, head men, head women, or hook or mayan in the language they're called. So, you know, and as we move forward more with this global society that we have, you lose the ability to govern and control your local surroundings. And I'm sure, again, you know, I'm preaching to the choir as you're talking about, like Simone was presenting, you know, moving into jurisdictions of different people, and then the sometimes nightmare that is trying to get somebody on the other side of the table to hear you and listen to you, but really not having any control. So we're moving, you know, the Nisenan people, our new way of life here is so completely, I would say, the opposite side of a coin of how the people lived here for thousands of years. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so we're still we're still here, which is it's shocking what a surprise that is to some people. And I guess it goes along the lines of, I was shocked when I learned that, you know, I live down here in Grass Valley, and my grandpa talked about, you know, the great animal species that are no longer here and visible to us, the great elk herds, the antelope herds, you know, the grizzly. He's on our flag, but where is he? Yeah, of course, we all know about the plight of the salmon, and all of these, the great California condor. These are all beings that are so intertwined in our how life began. Humans were pretty much stupid, and we learned how to live from the animals, you know, and they're no longer on our landscape. And so we felt a very similar connection as people being erased as many of those great animal species. And again, feeling like a bridge to reminding people of what it was like. And every time you remove a species like that from the palette of life, it's going to change everything in that ecosystem. You know, I look at the forests, and if you had great herds of antelope and elk, I mean, they ate all that stuff. So now we're trying to reverse engineer ways to take care of our forests without those animals that were kind of, it just all seems so upside down and backwards. And again, I'm not a scientist, but I think bringing those thoughts forward maybe will help us reverse engineer how to restore that balance somehow. Okay, go ahead to the next slide, please. And then we get into the tribal ecological knowledge, or tech, that they talk about, where the tribes are re-engaging with burning the forests, and you know, how to reestablish the banks of the creeks, and, you know, our basket plants that are so hard to get to anymore, you know, without them being sprayed or damaged in some way. A lot of the weavers put those materials in their mouth, and they were getting mouth cancers. And so, again, reverse engineering back to this way that was so so balanced. How are we getting there again? So what for fire is huge for the tribal people: the burning of the land, the burning of the dead, you know, the hunting and gathering practices, the praying and the ceremonies, and then the care for the animals, plants, earth, water, and air, of course. If you know, it's a whole package, whereas we're grabbing one piece here and there and trying to, as we're moving toward this climate disaster, we're not getting the whole big picture. Okay, next slide, please. And this is just a little visual. You know, this is early Nevada City, and it cracks me up because there's a couple stick trees around. Everything had been clear cut by this time, and the animals just completely overhunted to extinction for some of the species. Okay, next slide. And here's a shot of the hydraulic mining. You can see the water blasting away the sides of the mountain. You know, again, this heavy extractionism and, of course, economy, but not economy for everybody, economy for the few. And that's why I love the conversations today, because that's one piece that I see coming back. We're getting to the economy of the many, not, you know, equality and inclusion, those vulnerable Whitney had said, the vulnerable communities who probably participated the least in the climate disaster, but are going to be obviously the most heavily affected. Okay, next slide. And here's just a picture of my family. My mommy's the one in the middle, my aunties, and that's my grandma Carmel, who was a woman who could just, they were so poor, but she could still gather food for the family. They lived out in the middle of the forest where there were still forests there. There were still animals and plants that she could gather, and strong people, you know, but they are the ones that taught me what I know and told me the stories that I know to help me try to remember what it was like, or try to bring that vision forward to share with other people, so that we don't think that, you know, there was a time when there was a balance. Okay, next slide. And here they are grown up. There's my mama to the left. That's me with the orange shirt on, my Aunt Lorena and my Aunt Sarah. And we're standing kind of in the background. You can see where Lake Wildwood is. I don't know if you guys are geographically familiar with the area, but very central to my family and where most of my tribal stories come from. So we're standing there with this view. And then in the back too, you can see Estumyanim for the Nisenan. That's the Sutter Buttes, although my grandpa said it wasn't polite to call it that. But that's for us where all life comes from, where we go and we die, then we go off to the Milky Way. And, you know, the Sutter Buttes have been privately owned since the 1850s, so our most sacred place, you know, we don't have access to. Okay. And then, you know, the center for my work right now is to restore federal recognition to the Nevada City Rancheria and Nisenan tribe. And we were federally recognized up until 1964 when we were terminated. 44 tribal groups, rancherias, were terminated in California between 1958 and 1965. And 41 of them have been restored. And unfortunately, Nevada City Rancheria is one of the 3 that was congressionally terminated that has not been restored. So a lot of my work right now is focusing on that problem for us, to have a seat at the table with a lot of the things that are going on today, dealing with the Army Corps of Engineers when we're talking about hydrology and the different rivers and the salmon restoration, the different water agencies, the Tahoe or the national forests. A lot of times we don't have a voice because we're not federally recognized. California has legislation that allows us to have a bit more of a voice, but if you're not federally recognized, you don't have that government-to-government relationship. And I do believe that we have a lot to share. I always say, if we were federally recognized, we could, you know, what kind of partner could we be? What level could we step up to? How much could we share to help restore the balance and to, you know, give some good solutions, maybe bring some of that old wisdom back that may really pertain today in some situations. So I like to say also, if anybody knows President Trump and, you know, you have good friendship with him and you can help us get recognition through an executive order, that's how we were originally created, so by President Woodrow Wilson. So I always want to throw that out there. If you guys happen to know him, you know, maybe you could give him a jingle and help us out. All right, so last slide, I think. That's it. Yeah, thank you so much. And I hope I didn't talk too fast, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all.
Thank you very much, Shelley. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you again for sort of persevering through all of our technological challenges. Much appreciated.
Oh, thank you, Simone.
Oh, yeah, no worries. So we're going to go ahead and open it up to a question and answer session. We have about 20 minutes left. We're going to lose Whitney at 11:25. So there's no reason why we can't keep Shelley on until 11:30. Shelley, I'm volunteering you in your time. I hope that's okay.
Sure, it's fine.
So I just want to kind of open it up. If anybody has any burning questions for Whitney and Shelley, the Q&A is probably the best spot to put that. You're also welcome to put it in the chat. I have access to both windows. So happy to give you some time to think through your questions and go ahead and put those into those boxes. But while we're waiting for those to come in, Shelley, I do have a question for you that came up during your presentation.
Hmm.
And you answered it. You answered it a little bit, but for those, just if you wouldn't mind diving a bit deeper, what are some of the major barriers and limitations for the Nisenan tribe that stem from not being federally recognized? And yeah, what are some of those major barriers? Could you kind of flesh those out for us?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So, you know, I'm not a speaker. You know, I'm just a musician. I always say I played music my whole life. I play bass and sing in a rock band. That's really what I've done for most of my life. So, as I started speaking out and trying to, you know, had some people who have helped me try to really get ideas into, you know, the 2-minute elevator speech. You know, if I get one of these people in the, you know, proverbial elevator, I need to really articulate what, like the question you just asked. It's a wonderful question, and I've thought about it. And like I said, a lot of times by hearing myself talk is when all those little, I guess there's synapses in your head start coming together. And the most recent revelation I've had is that federal recognition would mitigate many of the things that ail the tribal members today. So we're a very small tribe. We have 144 members right now, you know, and that's down from like 9,000 members before the gold rush. And a lot of things plague our community, just as they plague other, you know, DACs or disadvantaged communities, the vulnerable populations. We have, you know, we have a lot of drug and alcohol abuse, the internal family violence, things that I've now learned, you know, are downstream of historic traumas that have never been resolved. And a lot of our youth are acting out the effects of this, but they don't know why. They're just like us in the planet right now. We're sort of disconnected from how it used to be, and they are too. But the biggest thing, you know, is that the tribe would be instated into the list of federally recognized tribes. And with that comes the opportunity to participate in all of the federal Indian programs that already exist. So you don't need a new budget. You don't need new legislation created. It's already there. It's already a functioning wheel. And we would literally just, the door would open and we would have access to those programs. That's health, education, housing, just all the kind of things. The economic development that's going on in Indian country today is just really fabulous. Clean energy. You know, tribes are really on the forefront of that, but we can't participate in that because we have no capacity. We have no, you know, nothing to get us across the finish line, so to speak. And the other thing is to have land again, to have land, to self-govern, to have access to the federal Indian programs, and it's tribal sovereignty. It's the ability for the tribe to govern itself, and it stops the further and continuous attempt to fully assimilate the tribe. So that was not a 2-minute elevator speech, but you know, there's so much at risk. We have no fluent language speakers. You know, we need a big museum and culture center. I mean, there's so many beautiful things I think that we could offer to our community and really be a good partner. But right now we just have no capacity, and there's no safety net. And literally the tribe is critically endangered, and it's heading off of that, you know, again, that waterfall analogy I like to use all the time.
Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you.
As far as climate adaptation and mitigation goes specifically, I seem to recall the Nisenan tribe being involved locally in some meadow restoration efforts.
Yes.
Can you speak to those, please?
Oh, sure. So we've gone out, you know, with some of our different environmental organizations. We partner with Circle, the Variable Land Trust, the Sierra Fund. So we've got some heavy hitters here locally. And you know, it's, and I don't mean to sound, excuse me, I don't mean to sound remiss or disrespectful or anything, but you go and you see one meadow, and knowing the fabric of the landscape and how interconnected everything is. And, you know, we have private property, so you have private parcels, and you go out to this one meadow and you're trying to, I mean, while it's wonderful, and I don't mean to, I just sound like I'm downgrading the beauty of what's happening. But you go out to one meadow and you look at the devastation that one old rancher has done by, putting a road down the center of the meadow and cutting the big ditches in the side to, because they want the meadows dry so that the cows can graze or whatever. And while it makes me happy and I see all the money that's flowing into projects like this, and I know that every one of them is important, it also makes me sad because it's like such a, I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer either, but it's such a tiny drop in the lake of what needs to happen. And of course we're learning. We've been really present in several different local community things that are happening, trying to get rid of invasive species and replant native stuff. But it just seems like it bums me out. It's so broken, and it's going to take so much time and effort. And I think part of the sadness for me is that we don't have the capacity. If I could get our nonprofit into a couple $1 million a year budget and hire all my cousins to be out there doing the fire and the restoration and all this kind of stuff, I might feel a little better. But because I'm usually asking them to take a day off work to come out, and whether it's restoration or being a tribal site monitor where they're doing land disturbance, like we're working on the levees right now, and just standing there watching the construction crews in case they hit a burial site or something. And there's just no financial capacity for one thing. There's no economy for the tribe because we don't participate in all the federally recognized things. But it's a privilege to be there. It's a privilege to bring that point of view to every little project that's happening. But I couldn't be honest if I didn't say that every time I go out on one, I get a little bit more bummed to see the destruction, the level of destruction, and how far we are away from what used to be.
I can understand that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Kind of shifting.
That's not to say that we don't want to be invited out on those projects, even though it makes me sad. But so.
Yeah, of course. And I think Whitney and I were actually just chatting about this earlier when we were preparing for the webinar. I was looking over her slides and was struck by a bit of grief, quite frankly, looking at the retreating snow levels in the Tahoe Basin. And I think it's very difficult to divorce the emotional responses that we all have, that many of us have to the consequences of climate change. It's very difficult to divorce those responses from the science and from how we continue to deal with the various challenges that we're facing. So yeah, I don't think you are alone, if that helps.
Thank you.
Of course. So a question from one of our participants that I'm going to assume is intended for both of our panelists. And then Whitney, perhaps we can hear from you first on this one. What do you think should be done to help prevent extreme wildfires? And Whitney, let me know if you're having any connectivity issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I've seen in the basin, especially I've also worked on the Lake Tahoe West project, which is another multi-agency, multi-jurisdictional effort. A lot of what they're seeing is, it's the obvious. It's the forest health work. And so I think we have a big push in the basin to try and think about forest health across jurisdictions, thinking of watershed level projects where you're thinking about both watershed restoration, bringing up groundwater table in meadows, along with forest health in the same location. So I think we're trying to push a lot of that in the basin, kind of multi-benefit projects, and really pushing forest health, not just around communities, but also further away from communities. So I think that seems to be what we're focusing on the basin.
Whitney, to kind of dovetail off of that, and then Shelley, I have another follow-up question for you. Whitney, what has California Tahoe Conservancy's experience been with prescribed and controlled burning and kind of messaging that as a forest management tool? Is there positive reactions? Excuse me, positive. Are there positive reactions to it? Negative reactions? I'm curious.
I know, so I mean, I think the big thing for us is not working just as an agency. I don't know how much prescribed fire we do on just our lands. I know there's the Tahoe Fire and Fuels team, which is a lot of agencies, 20 plus agencies that get together and they think about a lot of that. They have an outreach group specifically to talk about messaging for prescribed fire. So I think they're really thinking about that effort and how to do it best and how to reach out to people more. So to me, I think the best way is to have this multi-jurisdictional effort where people are working together to message so that, I mean, everyone I know has social media, all our agencies in the basin, and so being able to pass around any information you get so that it just reaches the most amount of people possible, I think is the best way to deal with that. But I know there's definitely resistance to it. I know there's a lot of push to do it, and so I just feel like this kind of doing this Tahoe Fuels and Fire and Fuels team and doing things as a basin instead of just as an agency is what's hopefully going to help make it a more prominent process and be able to outreach to people so they feel more comfortable with it.
Thank you. Shelley, burning the land is a pretty prominent tool in the sort of traditional ecological knowledge toolkit. When you are out representing the tribe and talking to people about burning the land, what kind of reactions are you getting? What kind of messages are you hearing?
Well, people are scared, you know. They've heard about some of the prescribed burns that have, you know, jumped the borders and set the rest of the forest on fire, you know. But I think, you know, we found a whole piece of the Nisenan language when we were looking in the archives that discusses fire. You know, the Nisenan language reflects what the culture used to be. And the words for fire, short fire, cool fire, like how can you have a cool fire? Because the lands were burned so often that, you know, kids could set fires because it wasn't dangerous. I know there's an old story that the only time things caught on fire in any resemblance of what we have today was from lightning strikes. And because people had burned for so long, it was a completely manicured landscape. And I think that intrigues people. It's like if we could just get some of that under control, that, you know, the stuff on the bottom of the forest floor and all these small trees that just don't belong there. And how do we, you know, I try to bring questions that intrigue people, like what about reintroduction of species that used to eat most of this stuff? And, you know, people are using goats all the time, you know, which is really cool. And what about, you know, as soon as some of these projects we're working right now, we were invited to be part of this North Yuba watershed, which is like 275,000 acres. And so it's like, again, like Whitney was saying, these big multi-institutional swaths of land that we're being able to restore. But I want, you know, we've got to think outside the box because we just don't have the money and the hand crews to go out and cut that much acreage. And we don't want to clear cut, you know. So how can we think outside the box? But I think that line of talk really intrigues people and does make them feel like maybe you know, maybe you don't have to be somebody with a PhD necessarily to sit at the table, because I know that's my fear all the time, is like, what am I doing here? But, you know, let's get some of those ideas out on the floor, because we really do need to think outside the box and get back to that point where we can burn safely, where the kids can go set it on fire and it's not going to hurt anything. I mean, it's so far out of my realm of belief right now, but that's the way it used to be.
Excellent. Thank you, Shelley. So we've just got a couple minutes left before we lose Whitney. Whitney, a question came in that I wanted to field to you. We've been talking a lot about interjurisdictional cooperation and how important that is, because climate change does not acknowledge jurisdictional boundaries. And I think we have a couple people that are curious about how the Tahoe Conservancy worked with Nevada agencies on the various planning and adaptation efforts, and what your experience was with that.
Sure, yeah. So I think, when we originally started, we reached out to a lot more of agencies on the California side, being that they shared the same mandates, and we kind of felt like they would be willing to participate because they're subject to kind of the same rules and the same, kind of guidance to think about climate change and planning efforts. But we also realized, being the basin, it didn't make sense to leave out half of the basin when we're talking about this, because for sure, when we did our vulnerability assessment and science, it was the whole basin. So we definitely reached out to Nevada from the beginning, kind of due to, kind of how they were thinking about climate change in the beginning. They did have a representative, but didn't participate as much. Recently, they've kind of changed their perspective on climate change, and so they've been heavily represented by all their agencies. So I think what we just tried to do was keep them in the loop the whole time. Definitely, they were always doing things that were dealing with climate change impacts, just maybe not using the term climate change. And so we just tried to keep them in the loop and keep talking to some of the higher ups in kind of the Department of, Conservation, Natural Resources. And since then, we've kind of, the interest has grown over time, and we're in, we're talking now about kind of where are we going to go with this, what is this plan going to become, how are we going to present this to our individual states. And so I think it's been great. In the beginning, we were just trying to keep them in the loop, but now it's really grown into a partnership and working on this together. And so I think it's turning into, a great relationship.
Excellent, thank you. Whitney, I know we've got to let you hop off to get to your next meeting, so thank you so much for your time today and your presentation.
Thank you, Whitney.
Thank you, guys.
I think if nobody has any further questions, I might take this opportunity to go ahead and close out the webinar, and thank Shelley for her time. And I think we missed John right as he jumped off, but I want to shout out to him as well and tell him thank you very much. Thank you all for attending the entire webinar. I really appreciate it. I know an hour and a half out of your day is not insignificant, but my hope is that you have taken something away from this that you can either bring back to your climate adaptation and mitigation work, or to your agency, or to your organization. And as always, Sierra Camp is always open to collaborative initiatives. So if you have anything that you're thinking about or that you're interested in bringing to the table with us, we're more than happy to chat about it. Our email, our collective Sierra Camp email is on the slide, sierracamp@sierrabusiness.org. And you can also find more information on our website at sbcsierracamp.org. Once again, my name is Simone Cordery-Cotter. I'm the program manager for Sierra Climate Adaptation Mitigation Partnership. And I want to thank you all again for giving us your time today. Once again, a massive, massive thank you to our panelists and for their very educational presentations. And with that, we'll go ahead and end the meeting. Thank you all very much.